There's a town on the edge of the Atlantic where silence is more than a sound. It's a rule, but rules break when the right stranger walks in. Welcome to Family Crime Chronicles, your ultimate destination for chilling true crime stories. We uncover the darkest corners of real-life mysteries, twisted affairs. Make sure to watch this video to the very end, and if this story moves you, give the video a like. And if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon, so you will never miss an upload. Now, let's dive into the story. It started with footprints in the fog. Just after dawn, long before the cafes opened, before school bells rang and fishermen threw lines into the sea, a man walked the cliffs with two shadows padding silently beside him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with scars etched into his skin like forgotten stories. He didn't speak much, not because he couldn't, but because words had lost their weight a long time ago. They called him Julian Vega, a recluse, an American, and dangerous, they whispered. But what they didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was that he wasn't there to cause harm. He was there to forget it. And yet, like so many others who flee from their past, Julian had walked into a place where silence didn't heal. It hid. It would take just one encounter, one act of defiance, to tear that silence wide open. Julian Vega didn't come to Arlenport for redemption. He came for quiet. Nestled against the rugged cliffs of Western Ireland, the town had everything he needed. Bad weather, fewer people, and the kind of anonymity that only suspicion could provide. People saw him walking the coast each morning with his two Maine coon cats, massive, intelligent creatures named Rune and Atlas. They moved like phantoms beside him, alert, obedient, never leashed. Locals didn't like it, didn't like him. They called him the Ghostwalker. Some believed he was a mercenary. Others whispered of PTSD. But no one dared ask. The cats alone were reason enough to steer clear. No one could forget the way they seemed to stare, unblinking, as if they saw right through you. Julian had bought a small cottage just outside town, set apart from the winding main road. His daily routine was clockwork. 5 a.m. walks, midday work in his greenhouse, evening drills with the cats, and radio silence. The only person he spoke to regularly was the postmaster, an older man named Declan who didn't ask questions. Declan had once served in the UN peacekeeping forces in Sarajevo. He recognized a fellow ghost when he saw one, but the town didn't stay quiet for long. On a misty Wednesday morning, Julian took the cliffside path that cut through the school's backfield. It was later than usual, 7:30 a.m., and the fog hadn't lifted. He saw them before they saw him. 3 men in black jackets forming a semicircle around a woman holding a canvas tote. She had shoulder-length curly hair, glasses, and a pressed navy skirt. She looked like a teacher. She also looked terrified. Julian didn't change pace. One of the men gestured toward the tote bag. Another grabbed her wrist. The third kept watch. They weren't teenagers. These were grown men, organized, confident. Is there a problem here? Julian's voice cut through the fog like a blade. Flat, measured. They turned. "You don't belong here, yank," one of them sneered. But it wasn't Julian who moved first. It was Rune. A low, guttural growl broke the stillness. Atlas flanked left. The men froze, and then chaos erupted. Rune lunged, sinking claws into the calf of the man closest to the woman. She fell back. Atlas struck next, teeth bared, a blur of fur and sound. Julian stepped forward, calm and calculated. He grabbed the shoulder of the third man, twisted his arm behind his back, and shoved him into fence. Seconds later, it was over. One man bleeding, the others running. The woman, shaken but unharmed, looked up at Julian in stunned silence. "Name?" he asked. "Kendall." "Kendall Reyes," she said, her voice trembling. He nodded, gave a soft whistle. The cats immediately returned to his side. That should have been the end. But 10 minutes later, Julian was in handcuffs. Julian Vega spent the next 36 hours in a concrete cell below the Arlenport Municipal Hall. No formal charges. No public record. Just a sharp knock at the door every few hours and cold meals left untouched. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't need one. He had seen this before, in other languages, in other lands. When local power isn't questioned, it doesn't follow rules. It creates them. Meanwhile, Kendall Reyes sat in her school office, her hands still trembling from what had happened. It wasn't just the attack, though that alone was chilling. It was how no one had reacted afterward. The school principal told her to avoid unnecessary incidents. Her colleagues avoided her eyes. No one, not even the local constable, had contacted her for a statement. The men who had cornered her weren't arrested. They weren't even reprimanded. That's when the name slipped from one of the older teachers' mouths. Quietly, fearfully, the Cultural Watch. At first, Kendall thought it sounded like some harmless town society, maybe an overzealous historical preservation group. But that was before she started asking questions. She went to the town library, a squat, aging building near the edge of the harbor. Its archivist, a woman in her late 60s named Brio Shannon, stiffened the moment Kendall asked about the Cultural Watch. Just history, Bree said too quickly. Men who didn't want the town to change. But they're still active, Kendall pressed. I saw them. Bree paused. Then you didn't see them. The conversation ended there. Julian stared at the graffiti on the wall. Old carvings, dates from years past, initials paired with numbers and foreign symbols. It wasn't boredom that had him examining the etchings. It was instinct. Every surface told a story. Every scrape, a voice that never made it out. At midnight, an envelope slid under his door. No markings. No fingerprints. He picked it up, opened it. Inside, a single sheet of age paper, handwritten in small, precise script. Asked about Jonah. Asked about the Lighthouse vault. Julian didn't flinch. He folded the note and burned it using a match from the emergency pack sewn into his boot lining. By sunrise, he was free. No charges. No record. Just a pair of cold stares from the desk officers and a warning. Stay out of trouble. The moment he stepped outside, Rune and Atlas bounded toward him from behind a parked van. Someone had brought them back. Someone who wanted him armed. Julian didn't smile. He simply kneeled, let each cat nuzzle against his hand, and whispered a single command. Watch. They turned in unison, eyes scanning the narrow street. 2 days later, Julian and Kendall sat across from one another at Declan's Cafe. It was the first time either of them had spoken freely since the attack. I think there's something buried here, Kendall said. Literally. And it's tied to those men. Julian said nothing. She slid over a faded newspaper clipping she'd found. Barely legible, dated 13 years ago. The headline read, Local boy still missing. Jonah Baker last seen near the Lighthouse. The article was no more than 100 words. The boy was 12, had a stutter, liked painting ships, and he disappeared during a town parade. No body. No suspects. The case, it said, had gone cold, except it hadn't. The article had been removed from the library's main archive. Kendall found it in a water-damaged box behind the supply closet. Julian folded the paper, placed it in his jacket. Then he said his first full sentence to her. I need someone. Mara Kellen wasn't easy to find, but she owed Julian her life, back in Kandahar. When her convoy was ambushed, Julian dragged her from the wreckage, stopping her bleeding with a zip tie and prayer. Now she lived off-grid in County Mayo. Part hacker, part historian, part conspiracy therapist. When Julian showed up at her cottage with a thumb drive and a single name, Jonah, she didn't ask why. She started digging. bank statements, council minutes, satellite imagery. Mara worked like a surgeon, extracting truths the town had buried. Her findings: several large donations to the Arlenport Preservation Society. Front for the watch came from anonymous European accounts linked to right-wing cells. A pattern of disappearances over a 20-year span. Always boys. Always between 11 and 14. Town festivals used to coincide with heritage rituals, whose details have been stripped from public records. And something else. A record of a municipal project in 2003. Restoration of South Lighthouse. Subvault sealed under Directive A2-72. It was enough. Julian returned to Arlenport under cover of fog. Kendall was waiting in his greenhouse. She had changed, no longer wide-eyed. There was fire in her now. What did she find? Kendall asked. Secrets. Rune and Atlas prowled the perimeter, while Julian opened a small tactical case. Inside, maps, floor plans, infrared photos. The layout of the lighthouse, last updated in 1991. Kendall stared at him. You're preparing for a war. No, Julian said quietly. I'm preparing for the truth. The Arlenport Lighthouse hadn't been operational for years. From a distance, it looked like a postcard relic. Wind-blown, cracked, weathered by salt and time. But up close, it felt wrong. The iron gate at the base was rusted shut. The windows had been blacked out from the inside. It didn't take Julian long to break through. The town had forgotten how to guard against someone like him. Rune and Atlas moved first, sniffing the wind. Julian followed, every step deliberate, every corner cleared with precision. Kendall stayed behind, stationed on a nearby hill with a pair of binoculars and a walkie. Inside, dust blanketed everything. The main chamber was empty save for some toppled oil drums, a coil of rope, and a cracked lens from the old beacon. But it wasn't the tower they were here for. It was what lay beneath. Julian found a hidden latch behind the tool cabinet, just like the floor plan had shown. The trapdoor creaked open. What he saw next would haunt him. It wasn't a room. It was a bunker. Metal walls lined with insulation. Shelves of VHS tapes, manila folders, and rows of books with no titles, just hand-marked symbols. In the far corner, a desk, and on that desk, a journal, bound in leather, the name embossed on the front, Jonah Baker. Julian turned on his headlamp. Rune stayed by the stairs. Atlas slunk to the far wall, pawing gently at a pile of blankets. The journal opened easily. Inside, frantic, childlike handwriting, rambling descriptions of voices beneath the sea and shapes in the dark, sketches of twisted faces, charts of stars and old-world runes. One page simply read, "They said I have to forget, but I won't. I won't. I won't." Kendall's voice crackled through the radio. "Are you safe?" Julian didn't respond. "Not yet." He moved to the tapes. Most were unmarked, but one had a label, barely legible under the dust. Initiation, July 14th. He pocketed it. Then his eyes caught something on the far wall, engraved symbols matching those from the journal. They weren't random. They were Celtic. Old. Julian snapped photos. He would send them to Mara before he left. He did one more sweep. In the corner, behind a false panel, he found it. A black binder marked Inheritances. Inside were photographs. Children. Profiles. Names and dates. Each followed by a signature line. Only a few had been signed, but Jonah's was. Back at Mara's, Kendall reviewed the footage from Julian's body cam. The journal. The binder. The symbols. Mara froze the video and enhanced one page. "That symbol," she said, "it's not just Celtic. It's been used by 3 known extremist sects. 2 in Romania, 1 in Norway. All of them practice selective indoctrination. mostly children. Some kind of twisted coming-of-age ritual. Kendall looked pale. They've been doing this for how long? Mara clicked through a timeline on her screen. Earliest trace I found? 1947. But Arlenport, that's the most complete archive I've seen. Mara pulled up financial records showing donations from shell corporations traced back to fringe nationalist groups. The Cultural Watch had been laundering money, possibly trafficking influence, ideas, and worse. This isn't just a town secret, Mara said. This is a model. Julian knew the clock was ticking. The watch would discover the break-in soon, and they'd retaliate. He doubled down on training. Rune and Atlas responded to over 30 hand signals. He added 3 more. The cats began drills in total darkness, tracking scents, navigating obstacles, responding to audio commands. He wasn't preparing for a fight. He was preparing for proof. The real war was perception. If they could expose the watch before it buried the story, before it buried them, then everything might shift. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. A stone room lit by torchlight. A boy blindfolded, kneeling, chanting. A circle of robed figures surrounding him. One held a small, carved blade. Another recited something in Latin. Then screams. Static. Cut. No context. No names. But the boy had a birthmark on his neck. Julian matched it to Jonah's school photo. Same mark. Same shape. They had recorded the ceremony. It was real. He sent a copy to Mara, another to Kendall. Then he packed the cats, the evidence, and a small black drone into a travel case. It was time to move. Julian Vega knew the system wouldn't help them. He had seen too many systems collapse under the weight of truth. If they went to the police, the tapes would vanish. If they filed a report, they'd vanish too. What Arlenport needed wasn't trial. It needed a witness. So he turned to the underground. Mara connected Julian with an encrypted podcast based out of Berlin known as the Void Signal, a digital speakeasy for whistleblowers, runaway journalists, and those society branded unstable just for speaking the truth. Julian sent everything: the drone footage, the VHS tape, the scanned journal entries, the financial records, photos of the vault, photos of the children. Every file had metadata, timestamps, source verification. Mara made sure of it. Julian didn't narrate the story himself. He let Jonah's journal entries do that. On a rainy Thursday morning, 7 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, the episode went live. It hit 400,000 downloads in 3 hours. By noon, a trending tag swept social media. Hashtag Where's Jonah? Hashtag Lighthouse tapes. Hashtag Cultural Watch exposed. By 2 p.m., for different news outlets reached out to Kendall for comment. At 5:45 p.m., the first national journalist landed in Arlenport. Declan's Cafe closed early. The mayor released a canned statement. Disturbing allegations, currently under review. The local news posted a single-sentence update on their website, then removed it 10 minutes later. But the silence was broken. That night, someone torched the public library. Kendall arrived to see the flames licking through the roof. Bree O'Shannon, the archivist, stood outside sobbing, holding a box of old reference cards. She handed them to Kendall. "They're going to erase us," Bree whispered. "Don't let them." The next morning, Kendall sat for a live interview with a U.S. broadcaster. She said the names out loud. Raylan Miles, The Cultural Watch. Jonah Baker. Julian stood beside her, silent, unmoving. Atlas curled at his feet. Rune stared into the camera. With mounting pressure, the National Police Service opened an official investigation. The Ministry of Cultural Affairs released a statement disavowing all knowledge. But the evidence was already public. A week later, a task force raided the town hall. They found documents, hard drives, shell company connections. A total of 17 members of the watch were arrested, but not Raylan Miles. He was gone. The last person to see him? A ferry worker who said Miles boarded a boat 2 days before the leak, carrying nothing but a duffel bag and a large black case. In the days that followed, Arlenport became a fractured mirror. Some locals called Julian a hero. Others called him a destroyer. Old families left town. Others returned. Families who had once fled after asking too many questions. Kendall received daily threats. But she didn't leave. She started a public trauma group named after Jonah. Julian rebuilt the greenhouse, turning it into a training center. He taught animal therapy, hand signals, self-defense. And every morning at 7:30, he tapped the floor twice. Rune and Atlas would rise, stretch, and begin their routines. The town would never be the same. But it was finally honest. The cultural watch had been dismantled. The town was cracking open. But justice wasn't complete, not without Raylan Miles. Julian had studied Miles during the hearings, on footage from a decade-old council meeting, in photos from the archives, in one brief moment when they crossed paths outside the courthouse before Miles vanished. He was a man obsessed with control, not disappearance. Miles didn't run to hide. He ran to wait. Mara tracked a financial trail, a private land purchased 2 years prior under a false name. Coordinates placed it in the Black Valley, an isolated stretch in County Kerry, shielded by dense forests and near-zero cell service. A surveillance drone couldn't get close. But Julian didn't need one. He packed light, tactical gear, the cats, a worn copy of Jonah's journal, and a silver whistle. 3 tones, their emergency signal. Kendall wanted to come. He told her no. This part is not for light. He arrived at night. The property was surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence, 2 solar lights, and silence, so deep it felt premeditated. Rune took the left perimeter. Atlas slinked right. Julian breached through a crawl space beneath an old maintenance shed. Inside, 2 buildings. One looked abandoned, windows broken, ivy swallowing the brick. But the second still had heat signatures. Julian watched from a ridge above with thermal goggles. Mara had mail from Berlin. 1 person inside, possibly 2. He moved. Julian entered through the rear, every movement silent, deliberate. The cats flanked him, 1 ahead, 1 behind. The smell of chemicals and mildew filled the air. Candlelight flickered from beneath a cracked door at the end of the hall. He kicked it open. Raylan Miles stood at a table, writing something in a journal. He didn't flinch. "You finally came," Miles said. Julian said nothing. Miles gestured to a chair. "It was never about you. You were just the trigger." Julian stepped forward. "Where's Jonah?" Miles didn't answer with words. He simply pointed to a stack of photo albums. Julian opened them. Dozens of children, labeled, cataloged, but Jonah's file was gone. Then Miles laughed. "Truth doesn't set people free. It blinds them. You think you saved the town?" Julian took out the drone footage, set it on the table. Hit play. The chanting, the screams, the blood. He watched Miles' face change, not fear, not shame, resignation. "You'll never understand what we built," Miles whispered. Julian looked at him once more and said, "I don't have to. I just have to end it." Rune barked. Atlas growled. Then came sirens. Mara's digital ping had worked. Backup was arriving. No death, just evidence. Julian could have ended him right there, but he didn't. Instead, he stepped aside and let the agents take Miles. The final blow wasn't violence. It was exposure. Every name in the albums, every dollar tracked, every ritual recorded. Raylan Miles would stand trial, international, and Jonah Baker's story would become curriculum In every trauma therapy program in the country, Julian and Kendall would make sure of it. Arlenport no longer hides behind silence. The sea still whispers through the cliffs. The fog still curls through narrow alleys. But the quiet now feels different, earned, not imposed. There are still wounds, but there is air. Julian no longer sleeps with one eye open. His greenhouse has become a sanctuary, not a bunker. Locals come now, not with questions, but with purpose. He trains them in situational awareness, in handling trauma, in working with animals. He teaches trust through silence, patience through stillness. Every morning, just after sunrise, he walks to the edge of the bluff with Rune and Atlas. He taps the ground twice. They rise, stretch, and walk forward. He doesn't give them a destination, just the permission to go. Kendall stayed. She bought a home near the cliffs, something simple with wide windows and creaky floorboards. She started a community center out of the old bakery. Each Tuesday night, she leads a circle of 10. They read from Jonah's journal, not as evidence, but as a boy's truth. They write letters to the people they were, when they still believed silence was safety. She still teaches, too. But she doesn't teach from the state curriculum anymore. She teaches children how to speak when they're afraid, how to listen when no one else does, how to stay standing, even when their voice shakes. His body was never found, but his words live in every corner of Arlenport now. They're carved into the community center wall. They're painted beneath the Lighthouse gate. They're whispered during town hall meetings and printed at the back of every school's welcome packet. They said I had to forget, but I didn't, and now they can't either. And the town, some people left, but more returned. The cultural watch is gone. In its place, something unexpected has bloomed, a commitment to transparency, to vulnerability, to remembering. The town hosts an annual night vigil now, not just for Jonah, but for every voice that was once forced underground. Julian attends, always in the back. Kendall speaks. The cats curl beneath her chair. Mara visits sometimes, too. One morning, long after the chaos, Julian stands alone on the beach. He watches the tide come in. Rune and Atlas paw at the wet sand, leaving faint tracks behind. The wind carries the sound